It was supposed to be the ultimate deal, a corporate-born structure applied to a war zone, but it took less than 24 hours for the entire architecture to crumble. Donald Trump, fresh off a decisive election victory, presented a plan to govern post-war Gaza. He called it the Board of Peace. 9 seats, 9 votes, a mix of Arab allies, Western powers, and regional brokers, designed to stabilize the most dangerous strip of land on Earth. And before the ink was even dry, the Prime Minister of Israel said no. Not maybe, not let us negotiate, but a hard, flat rejection. Specifically, Benjamin Netanyahu looked at the list of proposed board members, pointed to 2 names, and effectively told the White House that this plan was dead on arrival. This matters to you, sitting in Chicago or Dallas or Seattle, more than you might think. We are not just talking about diplomatic hurt feelings here. We are talking about the illusion of American control. The United States has spent decades building a security architecture in the Middle East based on a simple premise. We provide the weapons, we provide the security guarantees, and in exchange, we call the shots on the big strategic decisions. That dynamic, the very foundation of Pax Americana in the region, is evaporating in real time. If the President of the United States cannot dictate the terms of a ceasefire board to a close ally that is heavily dependent on American munitions, then the United States is no longer the hegemon. And if we aren't the hegemon, then the vacuum that is left behind will be filled by chaos, by higher energy prices, and eventually by American troops being pulled back into a conflict we have been trying to leave for 15 years. Everyone is focused on the rejection itself. The headlines are all screaming about Netanyahu defying Trump, but that is the distraction. That is the noise. If you want to understand what is actually happening, you have to look at the 2 specific names that caused this explosion. Everyone is looking at the relationship between Washington and Jerusalem, but the real danger, the structural fault line that could tear the region apart, is quietly building in Ankara and Doha. To understand why this blown-up deal is a catastrophe in the making, we have to go back to the basic geography and economics of the region. The Gaza Strip is small, impoverished, and utterly destroyed. Rebuilding it is not a billion-dollar project, it is a $50 billion project, and it is a project that requires boots on the ground, police forces, and logistical supply lines. Donald Trump, viewing the world through a transactional lens, looked at this problem and did the math. The United States does not want to pay for it. The American taxpayer is tapped out. Israel cannot pay for it. Their economy is already bleeding from a multi-front war. Egypt is broke. Jordan is unstable. So if you need tens of billions of dollars and heavy political capital, who do you call? You call the guys with the checkbooks, and you call the guys with the connections. You call Turkey, and you call Qatar. And that is exactly what the Trump administration did. The proposed Board of Peace included the United States, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, a Palestinian representative, and then the poison pills, Turkey and Qatar. From a business perspective, this makes perfect sense. Qatar hosts the political leadership of Hamas. They write the checks. If you want to force a deal, you need the banker in the room. Turkey is a NATO ally, a massive regional military power, and holds significant sway over the Muslim Brotherhood factions across the Middle East. If you get them on the board, you theoretically co-opt them. You turn the arsonists into the firefighters. It's a classic Trump move. Put the enemies on the payroll so they have a stake in the success of the venture. But geopolitics is not real estate, and this is where the American logic crashes headfirst into Middle Eastern history. To Benjamin Netanyahu, and to the vast majority of the Israeli security establishment, Turkey and Qatar are not partners. They're not even rivals. They are viewed as active hostile entities. Turkey, under President Erdogan, has spent the last year comparing the Israeli government to the Third Reich. They have hosted Hamas leadership. They have severed trade ties. To the Israelis, inviting Turkey to sit on the governing board of Gaza is like inviting the fox to design the security system for the henhouse. It's viewed as an existential insanity. And then there is Qatar. while Washington views Doha as a useful intermediary, a place where we can park Al Udeid Air Base and talk to the Taliban or Hamas. Israel views them as the engine of their suffering. In the Israeli narrative, Qatari money built the tunnels. Qatari media, Al Jazeera, shapes the Arab street against normalization. To ask Netanyahu to sit at a table where Turkey and Qatar have a vote equal to Israel's on the future security of a border that is an hour's drive from Tel Aviv, was a miscalculation of massive proportions. So, why did Trump do it? Why propose a board that was guaranteed to fail? This is where we have to look at the hidden map, the map of American exhaustion. The Trump doctrine, much like the Obama doctrine before it, is fundamentally about pivoting away from the Middle East. We want to focus on the Pacific. We want to focus on reindustrializing the American Midwest. Every minute the president spends dealing with Gaza is a minute he is not dealing with China or the border. The Board of Peace was meant to be an exit ticket. It was an attempt to outsource the headache. You bring in the Turks and the Qataris not because you like them, but because you need them to carry the load. You need their money to rebuild concrete towers in Gaza City so the American treasury doesn't have to. Netanyahu's rejection tears up that exit ticket, and by rejecting the board, he is forcing a binary choice on the White House. Either the United States stays deeply involved, managing the minutiae of Gaza's governance and shielding Israel from the diplomatic fallout, or the United States walks away and lets Israel handle it alone. And neither of those options is safe. If we stay involved, we're tethered to a conflict that is draining our credibility and distracting us from the main event in Asia. If we walk away, if we say, fine, you figure it out, then we risk a regional explosion, because without a governing structure, Gaza becomes a vacuum. And in the Middle East, vacuums are never filled with peace. They are filled with radicals. Let's look at the domino effect here. Let's say Netanyahu gets his way. Turkey and Qatar are kicked off the board. Who's left? The UAE and Saudi Arabia. But here's the catch. The Saudis and the Emiratis hate Hamas. True, they despise the Muslim Brotherhood, but they are not going to put their soldiers and their money into Gaza just to act as Israel's janitors. They have made their conditions clear. They will only participate if there's a clear path to a Palestinian state. But Netanyahu's coalition, the people keeping him in power, have made their position equally clear. No Palestinian state, ever. So, do you see the trap? The Trump plan tries to bridge this gap by bringing in the Turks and Qataris to balance the scales, to make the board acceptable to the Palestinians, so the Saudis feel safe joining. By vetoing the Turks and Qataris, Netanyahu isn't just blocking two countries, he's effectively collapsing the entire structure. Without the bad guys in the room to provide cover, the good guys, the moderate Sunni states, cannot afford to be seen collaborating with Israel. They will pull out, and then the board is just Israel, the US, and a puppet Palestinian rep who will have zero legitimacy on the street. That is not a board of peace. That is an occupation with American branding, and that is a recipe for a forever war. But this is where the story gets darker. We need to talk about why Netanyahu feels confident enough to say no to the most powerful man in the world. Conventional wisdom says Israel relies on the US for weapons, so the US should have leverage. And on paper, that's true. But leverage only works if you're willing to use it. Netanyahu is betting that Donald Trump, for all his bluster, is not going to cut off weapons shipments. He's betting that the political cost in the US of abandoning Israel is too high for any Republican president to pay. Netanyahu is playing a game of chicken with the White House. He knows that Trump wants a win. He wants a photo op where he signs a piece of paper and says, "I fixed it." But Netanyahu is fighting for survival. If he agrees to a board that includes Turkey, his right-wing coalition partners, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, will collapse his government instantly. They view Turkey as an enemy state. If the government collapses, Netanyahu goes to elections, and potentially he goes to jail. So, on one side, you have an American president who wants a quick diplomatic victory to pivot to other things. On the other side, you have an Israeli prime minister whose personal freedom and political career depends on dragging this out and refusing any compromise that looks weak. In a battle between a man who wants a deal and a man who is fighting for his life, the man fighting for his life usually wins. And while this diplomatic staring contest is happening, the ground reality is shifting. We are seeing a resurgence of insurgency in northern Gaza. We are seeing the West Bank boil over. And critically, we are seeing Iran watching all of this with delight. Iran is the silent winner of this failed board. The entire point of the Abraham Accords, the entire point of U.S. strategy in the region, was to build a united front of Arabs and Israelis against Iran. This board of peace was supposed to be the next step in that consolidation. By inviting Turkey and Qatar, Trump was trying to pull the Sunni world together. By rejecting it, the fractures in the anti-Iran coalition are laid bare. If Turkey is publicly humiliated by being rejected from the board, Erdogan will pivot even harder towards Russia and Iran. If Qatar feels sidelined, they have less incentive to pressure Hamas for hostage releases. The rejection doesn't just kill a committee, it radicalizes the players who are left on the outside. So, what happens in the next 6 months? We are likely going to see a period of intense private pressure. Donald Trump doesn't take public embarrassment well. Having his flagship proposal shot down on day one is not something he will forget. We might see the U.S. administration start to squeeze Israel in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Maybe a delay in a weapons shipment here, maybe a refusal to veto a UN resolution there. Trump will try to force Netanyahu back to the table. But Netanyahu is a master of delay.
He is the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history for a reason. He will likely offer a counterproposal. He will suggest a board with different names, maybe bringing in European powers, or trying to elevate local Palestinian clans. But none of those options solve the core money problem. The Europeans don't have the cash or the will. The local clans don't have the power. We are heading toward a stalemate, a zombie board that exists on paper but has no authority on the ground. And while the diplomats argue over who sits in which chair, the reality in Gaza will continue to be governed by the man with the gun. There is a deeper layer here regarding the U.S. domestic angle. Many Americans voted for an America-first foreign policy, which implied getting out of these endless Middle Eastern quagmires. This situation demonstrates why that is so difficult. You cannot just leave. If you try to leave by setting up a board, the board collapses. If you try to leave by empowering allies, the allies fight each other. The Middle East has a gravity well that pulls empires in, and right now, the United States is trying to reach escape velocity, and Netanyahu just cut the fuel line. This also signals a shift in the global order. For 70 years, if the U.S. proposed a security plan, allies fell in line. There might be some grumbling, but they fell in line. We are now in a world where a regional power, a client state, feels comfortable publicly vetoing the superpower. That is a signal to everyone else. If Israel can say no to Washington, why can't South Korea? Why can't Germany? Why can't Saudi Arabia? The rejection of the Gaza Board of Peace is not just a failure of diplomacy, it is a symptom of a breaking world order. We are moving from a unipolar world where America decides to a multipolar mess where everyone is a free agent looking out for themselves. In this new world, alliances are temporary, commitments are conditional, and peace is just a branding exercise for continued conflict. As we watch this play out over the coming weeks, do not get distracted by the press releases. Watch the money. Watch where the reconstruction funds come from. If the Gulf states refuse to pay without a political horizon, and the U.S. refuses to pay because of America first, and Israel refuses to work with the only other viable donors, then Gaza remains a ruin, and a ruin is a breeding ground for the next war. The tragic irony is that Donald Trump is right about one thing. You need a board. You need a coalition. No single country can fix this. But he's wrong about the timeline. You cannot impose a corporate restructuring on a century-old blood feud overnight. The question you should be asking yourself tonight isn't whether Netanyahu will change his mind. He won't. The question is, what does Donald Trump do when he realizes that his art of the deal doesn't work in a place where the currency is survival? Does he double down and force the issue, risking a rupture with Israel? Or does he wash his hands of it, leaving the region to burn? Because right now, the fuse is lit, the board is broken, and the only thing we know for sure is that when the explosion comes, it won't just be felt in Jerusalem or Gaza City, it will be felt at the gas pump, in the stock market, and eventually in the voting booth. The Board of Peace was a nice idea, but in the Middle East, nice ideas are usually the first casualties.